3, 2, 1.
Welcome to the Vintage Vibe, where we're going to take a peek at the request of one of our subscribers at some DIY speakers with, in some cases, some vintage components. And we'll also take a peek at these Klipsch Jubilee loudspeakers just because. So grab something nearby and hold on tight to be prepared to be blown away on the Vintage Vibe. And we're going to start appropriately right here in the lounge because I myself have been living with a little DIY, if you haven't noticed. These massive open baffle loudspeakers that use not one but two, as you can see here, Richter 15 woofers made by Seismic Audio. We'll take a peek at these up close and personal, talk a little bit about them, the design, as well as how they sound, and take a peek at 3 or 4 other DIY speakers that are completely different in design, using different driver arrangements, so on and so forth. And we'll figure out whether DIY deserves a place with your vintage audio collection. Like this beautiful AccuPhase 820 on loan from one of our viewers, Philippe. Thanks, Philippe. So stick around for this, as well as that little peek at the Klipsch Jubilee loudspeakers right here on the Vintage Vibe. So let's start with first talking about what exactly an open baffle speaker is. I mean, in the simplest form, there's no box. It simply is a bunch of speakers that are mounted to a baffle or a board, which is freestanding in nature, meaning, and essentially that means that the speaker generates the same sound pressure level from both the front and the back, with the two being out of phase of each other. In other words, one side of the speaker is pushing air from the speaker, and the back side is pulling air into the speaker. The analogy I just used, sometimes people will also say, is dipolar in nature. And dipolar speakers react the same way or interact the same way as open baffle speakers and electrostatic speakers. In particular, with creating sound waves both in front and behind of the speaker, which can interact with the room, versus a traditional box speaker, which directs that sound towards you and interacts with kind of maybe what's around here more so than what's behind it. The result is something that is unlike anything you've probably heard before if all you've listened to is traditional speakers. A greater sense of space, a greater sense of scale, really an uncanny ability to just project sound and not really be pinpointed like speaker there. It's just everywhere. Another speaker that does that very well is a bipolar speaker. And a bipolar speaker would be kind of like picturing hanging a sheet from a clothesline, actually 2 sheets, let's say, and standing between them, extending your hands out like this, and the sheets move as such. That's essentially what the sound is doing. Whereas with an open baffle speaker, it's like hanging one sheet and hitting it with your hand. The sheet moves forward or outwards and inwards at the same time. Needless to say, all 3 of these speaker types interact with the room and the space differently than traditional box speakers do. And that's why people love them so much. So these use B and C compression drivers, and you can see the maker inserted these screens, which will help kind of project that sound backwards on the speaker. And here is a kind of a close-up of the 15-inch speakers. These are made by Seismic Audio. They're a pro audio speaker called the Richter 15. They're 250 watts RMS, 500 watts peak, 8 ohm in nature with a 3-inch voice coil. The magnet structure is, well, a 50-ounce ceramic magnet. These are some pretty heavy-duty speakers. And the construction is solid. We're talking 2.5-inch thick, double-layered MDF and solid metal tube framing. These are some finely crafted speakers
well put together with good attention to detail. Now let's take a look at the crossovers. So these crossovers are very well made. They have Solon air coils as well as Solon capacitors. It's point-to-point wiring on handmade circuit boards with solid copper tubing on the backside, high-quality connects, as well as a separate brilliance control here to control the horn, which is just well thought out. You can also see here again close-ups of some of those connectors, as well as the binding posts on the back for the speaker wires. And here's a picture with the speaker grills attached. Again, they're really well constructed. Now, how did these speakers sound with the AccuPhase A20 power amplifier connected?
Well, I'm happy to say that these speakers sound fantastic with the AccuPhase. Now, you might say, they should. It's an AccuPhase. And yes, I mean, it is a tremendous amplifier. Certainly overbuilt. I mean, it's pretty imposing looking. It looks like a powerful amp. But keep in mind, this is only a 20 watt Class A MOSFET amplifier. Now with that though, these speakers take on a little bit different of a sound than, for example, with my Denon PMA A100. The Denon, the sound was bigger and there was certainly more drive, but it's a more powerful amplifier. The AccuPhase is really, I think they engineered it to excel in the mid-range, and that it does. In fact, it almost has a tube-like sound to it, and I think a lot of Class A gear, does have a richer mid-range typically, and sometimes a slightly rolled off top end or higher frequencies, and that seems to be the case with the AccuPhase, which with these speakers and the horns really sounds quite nice. So if you're thinking DIY, I would consider Open Baffle. They certainly get my stamp of approval. Just do your research, obviously, before you make a pair of Open Baffle speakers, and be prepared that they're probably going to be bigger. They're going to be a little cumbersome and awkward. They do have to come a little bit out into the room. Ideally, you'd have a more symmetrical room, even than what I've got, because remember, you have back sound waves as well as front sound waves, and the bass can, the bass waves can cancel each other in some cases, or almost double up, giving a awkward sound, needless to say. But with a little bit of time and attention and room placement, they can be really enjoyable speakers. Now, let's go take a peek at some other DIY speakers that are completely different than what we've got here. Come along.
Enter the popular DIY Fostex driver. This is a full-range driver that's been mounted in what we call a metronome cabinet, which is kind of a horn with a bass port at the bottom. These are wildly popular with DIYers because of their efficiency, their simplicity, flexibility, not to mention affordability, and the fantastic sound that they create. Enter the FE127. To look at the specs of these speakers, you wouldn't be blown away. I mean, they are not high power handling speakers, nor do they create gobs of bass. But these little banana pulp paper wonders have become all the rage in the right horn-loaded cabinets. All right. What more can I tell you about these awkward-looking speakers, the metronomes? I mean, they're kind of wide at the base, as you can see, and they taper to the top. They kind of resemble a horn, but they're ported at the bottom. In this particular driver, the FE127E seems to be a better speaker for ported enclosures, whereas the identical looking driver called the 126E is probably better in backloaded horns, transmission line cabinets, so on and so forth. And this is the funny thing about Fostex speakers. On the surface, they all pretty much look the same. They're all lightweight kind of paper cones. These are actually made out of a banana fiber. They are low power handling. They're not really expensive. I mean, it's not until you get to maybe the 206E where you see a whizzer on it, a whizzer cone to help kind of with high frequency. But the speakers really excel with small ensemble type music jazz, orchestra, folk, vocals, acoustics, woodwinds. Sometimes people find themselves changing the type of music they listen to because these speakers sound so good with that type of music. Now, I like to listen to all sorts of music, so that means either I have to have an extra pair of these for when I just kind of want to listen to something different, or you need to have a compromise with the enclosure and the speaker, because some of these Fostex cabinets do better with bass than others. See, the challenge is when they're producing the lowest octaves, sometimes it also makes this mid-range get a little thick sounding, which is why sometimes people augment them with a subwoofer. I prefer not to. I like to run them with no crossover and just use them as a pure full range driver, which is really what they're meant to be. Let's go inside. And as you can see, there is nothing in there, just some high-end speaker wire, no crossovers, and you can see the back side of the speaker, which, by the way, has a pretty hefty little magnet on it. I mean, these are as simple as it gets. Okay, last comments on these particular speakers before we move off to take a look at another pair. These speakers, very much unlike the next we're going to look at, these actually can create some bass. And I think that's because they're a little bit of a departure from the traditional horn. The port in this speaker, they seem to produce some really good usable bass, at least down to 50 hertz. In fact, everyone who hears these gets surprised with how deep they play and how well they actually can play high frequency at the same time. So these are a unique sounding speaker, and they're really kind of cool, although kind of crude looking. The next set of speakers we're going to look at are called PAWO side horns. We'll go take a look at those right now. So here are those PAWO side horns. Interesting speakers. This is the original prototype pair that was built around these exact plans. Originally to have the 127E in them, we've got the 126s in them today. It's a slender side ported cabinet. We'll go a little deeper on them in a minute here. These are in a transmission line style side horn. It's a relatively narrow cabinet. They do not produce much bass. I wouldn't say much anything usable below 70 hertz. So I do have in this instance a sub in the bottom here. I think it's a leftover sub I had from the home theater days, a little 8-inch Mirage. It just fills in that bottom end that we're kind of lacking here in the family room. Just a little Sony home theater. Actually, it's just a stereo receiver. One of the very first kind of high resolution type receivers. I think somebody gave it to me kind of as a thank you for repairing something for them. But these I used to have in the other room with a mini watt tube amp, and you know what, like the speakers downstairs, they do a fantastic job with reproduction of strings, guitars, woodwinds, vocals, but again, they do not have the fullness of sound of the metronome, nor the reproduction of bass of the metronome, despite being, for all intents and purposes, the same speaker. Okay, time to roll out the big guns. We've got a pair of mini Altec A7 clones that we're going to take a look at next on the Vintage Vibe. Welcome back. Now these are a pair of DIY Altec A7 clones. Well, kind of. In fact, the base cabinet on these, which are all made by hand, these are really scaled down Altec 816A low frequency horns. And you can see this is all wood, and this has all been hand bent. It's exquisitely built to the point of not being DIY and almost being production ready speakers. Again, these were made by Schmidt Audio, a small boutique type builder, a gentleman that I've met,
and he does just fantastic work. You can see the ports across the bottom here, and we've got them on casters that can lock. Makes it very easy to kind of move them around. Some handles on the side, all handmade brackets here to hold the horn in place. And we're using an Altec 806 8A compression horn. So this is similar to what you'd find in the Voice of the Theater type speakers or Altec Valencias. This is kind of the quintessential Altec horn, and it's all metal. This is just a beautifully designed cabinet. There is a pair of nice kind of beefy binding posts. These are new old stock. You can see them here a little bit closer. Anthem binding posts, they would have come probably from an Anthem amplifier or intended for that. On top, there's an attenuator to control the brilliance of the actual horn. You can see all high quality wires with a fusible link on it for the tweeter. On the back here, we've got kind of screws across here nicely covered to remove the back to be able to get at and service the driver if you ever needed to. And it's got a precision driven 12-inch handmade bass driver from the UK in it. And Precision Audio, those speakers are traditionally a pro audio type speaker, but they really border kind of the home audio kind of realm. I mean, this is easily just as capably a home audio speaker as a pro audio speaker. The speakers are good for about 50 hertz of good clean bass, and they are kind of wired right now in full range, but there is an option with the crossovers in the back to wire it so you have a sub augmenting these speakers for the bottom end, because these are kind of similar with bass to a pair of La Scalas or Heresies. It's not thunderous deep bass, but these are very punchy bass. I mean, this is bass you'll feel. And they're using all traditional kind of Hammond choke style coils in there. They look like transformers, as well as all Solon capacitors. The circuit boards, like on the open Baffle speakers, are all handmade, point-to-point wiring with copper tubing. And I'll show you a close-up of these speakers in just a second and talk a little bit about how they sound.
And here they are. It took a while to first get used to them because, well, I was expecting something a little bit different with these massive cabinets that weigh easily over 100 pounds each. The dispersion of the horn is big, and the bass, well, it's tight. It's the type of bass you can just feel, well, pounding right in your chest. It makes them fun. It makes them lively. But, well, they still do need a little bit of taming every now and then. Did I mention the horns have a wide dispersion? Altec horns are known well to either kind of put you in a love-hate relationship, so good thing they've got this brilliance control up top to control them. But all in all, this is what DIY is all about. Taking some old, putting it together with some new, having some fun, and creating a complete piece of art when you're done. And no, we didn't forget. Enter Klipsch Jubilees. These are $55,000 loudspeakers in Canadian funds in 2022. And you want to talk about wide dispersion? These horns have got to be a near 3 feet across. The compression driver, well, it's equally as large. Unfortunately, long gone is the day of real metal horns. These are made out of a composite plastic and do feel a little cheaper by nature. I was told the crates they came in were almost mistaken for small cars. And the cabinets, well, they're just massive.
So the Jubilees are huge. They're imposing. They are just overwhelming to look at. they really, are quite something in that respect. However, I was instantly kind of, I hate to say disappointed, but I kind of was when I seen the finish of the speakers. I think they could have done a lot better of a job for $55,000 loudspeakers. The veneers looked cheap. There was too much plastic, and the fabrics just didn't seem luxurious enough. In fact, this is even compared to the current line of Heritage products. I think a Cornwall looks better built than the Jubilees. They kind of remind me of just large, big screen TVs. Now, how do they sound? Because I think you buy a pair of speakers like this, one, to have huge speakers, but probably more so to have huge sound. And they do have a undisputable, larger than life soundstage where everything just kind of floats. And for huge speakers with huge horns, one would expect that the soundstage would be huge. And you would think it would take your head literally right off, which they don't. So they've tamed these huge horns, and part of this is done with an active crossover, which we did fool around a little bit with. The speakers, the more you listen to them with different style music, you start to appreciate that they really do a good job. They just kind of aren't as, I don't know, overpowering as you would think they would be. They start to just blend in the surroundings. And that was kind of neat that you could do that with a speaker that big. Now, I expected a lot more bass. Each cabinet uses two 12-inch woofers with 4 ports. I would argue that the old Klipsch Horns with the 15 in a folded horn enclosure in the corner of your room produces just as much bass, if not probably even more. So that was a little bit of a surprise. But if I had $55,000, which I don't, would I buy them? I would have to pass. I really would. Just because the construction to me was a letdown. In fact, I would buy the tannoys that I seen in the room, kind of beside them, because they just looked exquisite. And that to me is an heirloom piece of equipment if you're going to go out and spend big money on new speakers. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the episode this week on The Vibe, where we dove into some DIY. And I know it was a little bit longer of an episode, but I hope you had some fun. And if you liked it, subscribe. And we'll see you next time right here on The Vintage Vibe. We'll see you later.